When Steel talks, everybody listens.
What does diversity and inclusion mean to you or the company you're working for? Can you tell us a little bit about what you guys think and feel about what does that mean? Anybody? I would love to hear everybody's thoughts.
Yeah. I feel like diversity and inclusion, it means basically as we are building technologies and we want to look at the next few steps in the next 5 years, it's about building it with the hindsight and going first with inclusion, going first with diversity, not using it as a tool to be like, you know, well, we need more women or we need more people of color. It's about just not even looking at that and looking at, hey, look, this person, that person, this person, that person, and not even realizing or understanding the fact that it's a female, or hey, we need more girls because we don't have any, or we need more people of color. I feel like that has to be first, and it has to be a mindset that goes into every creator, whether you're doing content, whether you're doing whatever technology as well. That has to be a first, and can't be a second or a third.
I mean, I look at this from the perspective of bias, right? So if you think about the different types of bias that exist, you've got implied bias, you've got implicit bias, and you've got the kind of type of bias that we work to fight, which is algorithmic bias. So everyone's seen kind of what happened with Google when they trained all of their image processing on images that weren't of people of color. We saw that. But something a little less known is Uber. So Uber has a part of their algorithm which looks at where you physically call your Ubers from and where you do that from, right? So if you physically call your Ubers from Harlem all the time, it tracks the cars that are more likely to take you back to Harlem, which there are less downtown. So if there are less downtown, you end up waiting 5-6 minutes more if you're from Harlem, if you have Uber. So, you know, I definitely look at this from the perspective that Mike just talked about, you know, the qualitative and quantitative aspect of looking at someone as a person as opposed to kind of their diversity, right? But I also look at this from the perspective of how do we use a technology as an enabler and take the technology out of the way to get to diversity. And that's kind of what my company does from a machine learning and data perspective too.
I feel like it's a way of reaching out to those who, you know, can bring in more, because like people from different backgrounds and, you know, can like bring in something different than you, and I feel like it's another creative way of like showing different ways of collaboration within the VR space and community. So like just giving like a chance to like people like me is fascinating to me, and so like that's what diversity means to me in my opinion. So.
For me, diversity inclusion in VR means two things. One is including women, minorities, and so on in the teams who develop this technology, so that everybody can participate and shape this coming VR/AR revolution. Another thing is developing experiences and products that help people overcome the barriers, help people to be aware of the differences, either it's cultural differences or gender differences, and help people to overcome the bias. For example, it's not just the gender barriers or cultural barriers. So we have been developing products for Norwegian Armed Forces for pre-deployment training of soldiers going to Afghanistan, for cultural awareness training there. Also, we have here we have the situation with refugee influx and a lot of people from other cultures, and we have been developing solutions for medical personnel to work with patients from different cultural backgrounds, for example, with Muslim women. Recently, I am leading a project for Norwegian Labor and Welfare Administration with a goal to include and empower young unemployed persons. These persons often fall out of the job market for different reasons. Mental health issues, dyslexia. Some of them are refugees, they don't have the proper knowledge of Norwegian language. And we are creating virtual internships, virtual workplace training to allow them to practice different skills, to get them introduced to different workplaces. In this way, to include them in the work market and to allow them to try this, to get exposed to this and overcome some of their barriers and maybe some anxiety and other issues.
Great. So we'd like to dive a little bit deeper. I mean, I think you've talked about some examples and what does it mean to be have diversity, as well as some of the things that you guys want to, like, you know, Micah, you were talking about data and how do you use that. What is that? How does your team or your company like approach designing for product inclusion? Like, what do you, when you talk about data, like, what does that mean? Like, how do you use it, and how do you suggest people and companies use it? And same with like the type of project you're using. How do you approach to be able to work on those projects? Who should be involved in those projects? And like, what is that? I'd love to hear more about that.
I think when you're designing a product, you need to take into consideration three things. And I think these three things today are different to what they historically were. Historically, when you were designing a product, you took into consideration the target market. You took into consideration how technically competent the team you have is and how that fits into what you're creating. And you took into consideration how to monetize it, right? I think today you need to take into consideration the sample set of data that you're using in designing that product. So, you know, for instance, if you're talking about dating apps, for instance, or in the case of Google machine vision or whatever it may be, machine learning has pervaded product design so much now that it's used in the product design process. And how the data that you choose to be used in that process governs the product that comes out of it. So I think that's a bigger consideration of product design. It's kind of what we do as well. So at Centiment, what we do is we help advertisers to use data sets outside of their normal estimation to advertise and create technology that advertises. So what that means is if you have an AppNexus or a Google, usually they're going to use things like latitude, longitude, and, you know, maybe some forms of sentiment analysis and whatever. We pervade that. Human data is one of the biggest anti-bias tools, and that's interesting because, you know, humans are brilliantly biased, right? But machines and the way machines are being developed are completely non-human at the moment. So what that means is it's purely binary. If you give a machine a bunch of images to test, it tests the images, it learns from them, and it creates a product off the back of that. Empathy is not existent in that process. Emotion is not existent in that process. And so if you had, like, you know, machines making legal determinations, which actually happens in the case of recidivism risk at the moment in the United States, it becomes a completely non-human process devoid of emotion. So what we aim to do at our company is infuse the artificial intelligence process to the degree that it can have it infused in an equal way with human data.
Well, I can just give an example. It's very important to talk to the end user. So when we're now working on this project to empower young unemployed, we talk to them, interviewed them. And some of them told me that they feel excluded from the job market because of dyslexia. So many of them have dyslexia. And what they get at this employment centers, all these text-based job description that they're supposed to apply for, and they have problems grasping what it's about. Another group of users, those who are working at construction sites, often with no college degree, local qualifications, maybe immigrants with poor language skills, but they have to look at the blueprints and have problems of reading them. So what we are doing, we're trying to use these visual capabilities of VR technology and create this visual immersive experience to show without the text how a workplace looks like. For example, one of the things we have developed is an aquaculture site, aquaculture farm, because aquaculture is really big in Norway. And so actually you get immersed at this fish farm, you are standing at this fish pan, you can feed the salmon, you can check the knots, etc. Or you can create this 3D visualization of in detail of the construction of the house. So instead of reading the blueprint, you can have it visualized. In this way, you get included in this process.
Go ahead.
Okay, I was just gonna kind of tack on. I feel like what we do is I've grown up thinking that especially from my background, I understand that I really kind of grew up with no biases, right? So I was like, okay, this person is good until he tells me he's not good or shows me he's not good. So my company, the way I run it is, I can't help but add inclusion because of my standpoint. So I have to first go with the individual that's just better than everybody else. And whether you're a female or you are black or white, it doesn't matter who you are, I'm gonna go with the person that's better. The way that we've kind of tackled it is basically you have to put, whether it's women, men, you have to put them in that position to then give details and give leadership roles and then make those changes. I believe this is more of a mindset than anything, and it can be taught because I feel like anything can be taught, but I also feel that at a point in time where virtual reality and augmented reality, you're not gonna know who's gonna be developing the products. It's gonna come to a certain point where you're not gonna understand if this person was from the Ukraine or from Italy or from Africa. You're not gonna know. All you're gonna do is get into an experience and feel it. And when you feel it, you'll figure out later who did it. We're at a point right now where you can tell, okay, this person might have made it, that person might have done this, that person might have wrote that code. To your standpoint as well, as you guys know, you can tell a computer whatever you want to, and I was speaking about this earlier. It's about the makers, who's writing the code, the people that are developing the algorithms. If more individuals, like minorities, women, men, are developing the code, that's the big part. That's what we have to tackle. So I feel like we need to. I know there's a big thing on educating coders and getting coders in at a younger age, and I feel like that's going to happen over time. But in this industry, even though VR is relatively 40, 50 years old, we're at a point where technology is caught up, and we need more and more inclusion and more diversity around.
Has anybody in this room heard of or experienced the tree VR experience? You haven't? Okay, so this is an experience. I actually first experienced a Tribeca this year, which was amazing. So you're literally a tree, and you're in a rainforest, and it's amazing, and there's birds, and you're physically inside the tree. You look around, and there's birds, and they're on your branches, and everything's great. And then you get burnt down, and you die. Now, don't get me wrong, like, I really care about trees, I care about the environment. That's not even like a platitude, I really do care about the environment, but this was at Tribeca. It was in a featured spot. It was getting ridiculous amounts of attention. I guess the people who put it together got a lot of funding, and I didn't see anything there about police brutality. I mean, I didn't see one piece of content at Tribeca about police brutality, not one. Not even in like the second and third tiers of the prizes, right? So, to Michael's point, somebody went out of their way to make a piece of VR content about a tree burning in a year when 293 people have died at the hands of police. And that was in the mecca of storytelling in the entire industry, the thing that was valued over the 293 lives that were lost this year. So, to that point, I'd like to talk very quickly about something in data science called the decision boundary, which actually applies directly to VR. Very quickly, I won't bore you with the details, but a decision boundary from a machine learning perspective is the boundary between when you expect a decision to happen, when you've written code for it, and when it actually happens. So an example would be if I'm throwing a pen across the room and I expect it to accelerate or decelerate at a certain point and then hit the wall, maybe it decelerates a little bit later than I thought and it hits the wall at a slower speed, right? But I estimated it was going to decelerate like earlier in the process. So to Michael's point, the people writing the code, hard code decision boundaries into everything, not just from VR and AR and MR and XR, but to things like Metro cards. And if you've ever seen now, the MTA wants to have mobile app-driven sign-ins, right? Now the interesting thing about that is there is what's called a load balance in the MTA system, and that is the number of trains which get to certain places and also the number of stations which allow people in at certain times, right? You have right now a non-digital process for that. So no one gets locked out of a station or whatever. I've actually used Oyster cards in London, and there are phenomena like that from when people write the code. And that comes from simply the fact that those phenomena used to happen in places, very similar to where I'm from, Catford, South London, which is a socio-economically challenged area. So, to Michael's point again, That's so important. It's so important from a cultural perspective, from the tree example I just gave. It's so important from a technical perspective in terms of decision boundaries. It's so important from a budget perspective in terms of what projects get signed off. And the way that that's going to change is, at the moment, honestly, just more POC in those positions. I mean, you know, as we go forward, Michael's approach absolutely makes sense in terms of, okay, you know, look at everyone purely from a skills perspective, which is totally right, and that is a mecca of equality, and then it's amazing that you're going about things that way, but just the way things are right now, it's just more POC in the decision seat. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I was thinking about Michael's point as well. Like, you do look at the skills for sure, right, when you're hiring. But to bring that diversity and inclusion point of view, you need to look a little bit more than that, right? And because the teams that you're building, in order for us to have that representation when you're doing the coding, when you're doing all of these things, you need to have that diversity of thinking mind. So maybe
really quickly, I feel also as well when it comes down to the talent base, I think we stay in the same mindset if we think about it. Okay, this person's talented, this person's talented. You know, let's go this way because of the fact she's a girl. I think that's still in the same mindset because you're like trying. Like, you're really trying. And I think a lot of companies are doing that now because other companies have had backlash. So why can't you be the first person to spill the milk? Why do you have to be a higher company to fall in your entire PR system in order to really get it? Why couldn't we do this first?
Yep.
Why can't you be first? Why can't a company be first?
Yep.
Right? So that's just the way I...
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. And I think, yeah, that is definitely, like, you know, something that we should be considering and talking more about. And with that in mind, like, you know, we talked a little bit about the barriers, or maybe the perceived barriers that we see, because in general, like, the VR industry, yes, it's fairly new. And if you look at it, like, I go to a lot of meetups, and, you know, I work with Google, so I'm definitely in the tech industry, and I see that it's definitely, like, male dominated, right? Like, I'm one of very few women in our team inside Google. So maybe we could talk a little bit about, like, what do we think are some of those barriers or perceived barriers that when we talk to people who are interested in joining this industry, that they feel they may not be able to get into? Like, what are those things?
Well, I work at the social science department, but we have a VR lab there, paradoxically. Actually, we are building a chain of VR labs across our university that brings distributed campuses together. But the thing is, I'm kind of the main techie at my department, and the rest are very pure social science people. And many, especially women there, they say, "Oh, it's so complicated. It's so complicated technology. You must be so clever doing that." But I say, "I'm not that clever. I'm quite ordinary. Everybody can do that." And I started, and actually, the interesting thing that one of the most prominent, successful, both women and men working in the VR, they're actually not tech. They're a lot of journalists, for example, godmother of VR, Noni de la Peña, maybe you have heard of her, and her immersive journalism, it's actually direction she has created. No, have you heard of her theory, immersive theory experience, or 100 in Los Angeles, where you actually immerse into different situations, people being bombed in Aleppo, people falling of hunger in the streets of Los Angeles, and so on. She's a woman, and many artists like Björk create virtual reality experiences, and a lot of women who are social scientists, who are not techie, who are very prominent in the field. So if you think that this is just very hard and difficult, you are losing your place into this evolving development. You are losing your niche, and actually, by bringing this unique experience from social sciences, you can really create something unique at this merger of the technology and other disciplines. So, especially for women, this is a recurring phenomena. I hear women perceive technology is difficult. I don't want to get into that, and as a result, you lose your place into this development. You lose your opportunities. It's really sad. So I hope this changes.
Yeah, so I think that anybody can learn how to do VR or AR. Most of the stuff I learned was self-taught, teaching yourself to code or to improve your 3D modeling skills. And so like, because anybody could learn, and I was able to like put myself out there and build a portfolio, and I actually was approached by Nani to go work with her. And the reason why she hired me is because she was like, well, you're a woman, and there's not a lot of women in the industry, so I want to hire you. And so that, and I was like, okay, that's cool. And I was able to like work on like my first a couple of big VR projects with her, and so that was pretty cool. Just because, including I know how to do. I have some sort of technical and artistic background, and I was like, well, because you're a girl, I'm gonna have the best people in the industry to train you how to work this motion capture stage, and so like there needs to be like more connections with people trying people like her to like reach out to people of color or female, and just because they have a little bit of potential, like okay, I'll train you. Let's see if you like it or not. So it's really anything that it's something that anybody can do if they're just go out and do it.
I feel that, so I was at the MIT Hackathon like 3 weeks ago, and it was an unbelievable event. The fact that I walked in there and I didn't say, oh wow, there's a lot of people of color, but I know that's what they were really going for, which was great. But the entire time I wasn't like, oh wow, this person, that person. I just said, hey, there's a lot of people here. Like, this is really dope. There's a lot of good people here, and a lot of we don't look at people completely different. We are not going to change any industry, from entertainment to tech. If we don't change ourselves and in our life, if I get onto a subway in the Bronx and an individual gets on that looks a little sketchy, and I go into the next car, I'm just as biased as the next person. If another person walks into my office and he looks a little, I'm going to be biased with him. And I think if we don't change ourselves in our regular day life, regardless of who you are, white, black, Latino, whether you're a CEO, whether you're the person that wipes the floor, it doesn't matter. I feel like if we don't change ourselves in our life, that's where we have to start at, and if we can do that, there's going to be more, regardless of it, we're going to have more people of color around, we're going to have more women, it doesn't matter, right? That's inevitable. But I feel like if we don't change ourselves in our daily life, and everything that we do, from teaching our children, from teaching ourselves, there's no way we're going to change our companies. There's no way the entertainment industry is going to change, the tech industry is going to change. So I feel like we have to, I take it in, I grew up extremely privileged. I grew up, I went to a good school, went to a good college. My dad, very educated, but I took it as, look, everyone is equal, no matter what. Age, from ageism to sex, it doesn't matter. So I think we have to take it in our everyday lives. If we build it in our everyday lives, it's going to be inevitable. You put it into your business plan. It won't be part of your roadmap. It won't be part of something that you put on here. We need more women, or we need more people of color. That to me is ridiculous, because that starts from within you. It doesn't start as a roadmap to a company.
As the data guy on this panel, I want to make everyone aware of something amazing that got founded by a personal friend of mine at City, who's also a professor. He's a professor of computer science there. It's called the Center for Quantitative Diversity Studies. And Paolo Gadino, if you look him up, is the guy who's founded it, and he's raised $1 million from the Kaufman Foundation. What it basically does is it divorces the colloquial, anecdotal aspect of hiring women and black people in the workplace from the numbers, and it also looks at them in relation to one another. Because it's hard for an industry executive who's got a lot going on, trying to raise money or whatever, right? To be like, all right, cool, I need to be diverse. What does that mean? Oh, okay, I need to hire 5 women. Great. I need to hire 5 women. All right, now you just kind of made your life hard. Instead, in this case, call up Paolo. Like, he has an organization that does all the numbers for you. So, and then think about, all right, I've got this skill vertical here, and I've got this skill gap here in my organization, and I've got this business problem that I need to solve, and here is the cross-section of the market of the people who can do that. and here is how their skills break down quantitatively, and wow, this person who happens to be a person of color or a woman is the best person for that job. So, you know, that there exists now an actual organization that takes all of the work out of that. So, because, you know, admittedly, it is hard. Like, it's, even for bigger corporations who have departments dedicated to this stuff, it's data science, right? Like, you hire a HR person to do data science, it's not gonna go well. So, to Michael's point as well, like, you know, living it in your daily life is essential, I think, as well. And once you can do that, and then, in this case, just pull up Paolo, then you don't have to worry about whether you're being biased or not, because someone else has gone and done all the numbers for you, and they have a process that you can follow. And what he's actually doing is he's creating like a baseline framework for all tech companies to be able to do that. So, yeah.
That's a great point.
Can you repeat the name of that organization?
The Center for Quantitative Diversity Studies, Paolo Gallino,
Okay.
City University College, Professor of Computer Science.
That's great. That's a great point. So I'll ask one more question, and then we can open up to questions from you guys. So with that, I wanted to close with asking, what do you guys think? What would be your advice for the allies out there, the leaders who are looking to incorporate more product inclusion in their process as a company, as creating projects? What would be your advice to them, or your wish list? What they should be doing?
I think it's twofold, really. Be genuine, you know, because there's a very big difference between like allocating like a small part of your FY 2018 budget to hiring some random people and going, let me sit down and think about this. Let me sit down and think about like how the strategic goals of my organization and what I'm actually really trying to do and where we're trying to go fit into hiring people who are of underprivileged and socioeconomically challenged and POC backgrounds. And then, you know, I think on the side of the candidates, I'd say as much as you can, just try and remove any excuse for anyone to say you're not skilled, right? Go and take all the courses on Udemy. If you already have a degree, like, focus on one specific thing. It just, you know, the way I got to my career, I've been a product manager at NBC, Viacom, and also Aon. Actually, Aon, I helped basically make them $70 million from some data science I designed, was I trended towards the hardest things to do, right? So when I was in my computer science classes, I took R when we were taking C#. I took assembler, I can code an assembler. Like, I did the things that were disgustingly hard that no one wanted to touch, right? But because of that, when I got out, you know, as I say to a lot of the kids that I met at sea, you know, all of a sudden, I was the person getting roles when all of my contemporaries were at McDonald's, right? And that was the case. People in 2009 were working at McDonald's with computer science degrees. So yeah, just at both ends of the spectrum, be more skilled, be genuine, yeah.
I think that I would say, yes, learn your skills, but I've been like really, you know, pushing towards studying the brain for the past year and a half. I taught myself how to code in a year. I've also taught myself other things about the brain. And I think after you focus on finding out who you truly are, you realize that it takes a lot to do things you don't want to necessarily do. And it takes grit, and it takes will, and a lot of that stuff isn't necessarily embedded in our wireframe in our brains. We are taught to, once we are, especially all of us in this room, we seem like we're pretty much older. At a young age, we are taught to do this right, this answer's right, that answer's right, and that's it. And I think the brain, I know the brain has a way of being on autopilot. So everyone in here can get up and just walk through life without trying to teach themselves things. But in the past year, I probably have taught myself anywhere between 7 to 8 different skills. Was it hard? Absolutely. But I feel like if we tried to teach ourselves more and build better norms, that would then pour into our businesses, that pour into our friends. We probably would lose a couple of friends as well on the way, because that happens when you start learning different things. So I would say just learn a skill every 3 months from either a language on a linguistic part, or maybe you try to find out if you're a right brain thinker or a left brain thinker, or if you want to be both, and then challenge yourself to do that. I feel like in this industry, I'm going to be here for the next 20 years. And I understand and I enjoy this and I love it, and I will do it for as long as I can, regardless. And I think some people will understand that, but I think it's also about that grit, that you got to just keep knocking at that door of inclusion, of diversity, keep knocking at it, because the more times you build it, the better it will be.
Yeah, same thing what he says. Like, try to just create your own. Try to start off with something simple and create your own work of art, like either in VR and AR, and start off with like simple steps, or simple basic coding, or learning how to use certain software. And then like if you want to create content, like either 360 video or VR games, you know, and you have like a fiction of different characters, and you try and use a diverse colored type of characters rather than, you know, like what's happening in Hollywood where they tend to like whitewash, you know, characters. So like, you know, try bringing more colored people into that.
Well, I feel as a woman working in VR, I have to work extra hard and sacrifice things to still be included and participate in all these development and projects. Like, for example, I had a baby a year ago, and I felt though, you know, we have really generous benefits. We have 10 months fully paid family leave. But I felt not to be excluded from all the projects, I had to come back to work after 6 weeks. And so I gave almost all our family to my husband. And he stays with our daughter while I work on my career. He's a great husband, the best in the world. Still there is this existing inequality that women are the ones who have babies, and but to participate, to be included on these developments, and especially the VR industry that changes so fast, you have to make sacrifices. And you have to work harder than men working in the same business. And as a part of my work for the network I have founded, Women in VR in Norway, I will try to work for, do something with this injustice and work for additional funding possibilities for women. Our university already have some funding possibilities, particularly for women working with technology, for young researchers, for students. I'm going to fight for that more of the machines could be used for support women working with VR technology and recruit more students who are unaware of this possibility this technology opens for them for their careers.
Thank you very much, guys. We have 5 minutes left, so you guys have any questions for great panelists? Yes, please.
So I ran a web VR hackathon in June, and we didn't make an effort. It's just because there's so few people that do web VR. It's like, oh my God, someone said yes at all. But it was really not. It was really hard to watch, as there were a couple of women there, but one woman walks in, takes a look at the composition of what was there, and walked out. Now it could have been that there was an odor I didn't know, but I think she felt like there weren't enough people there that we hadn't created an environment that made her comfortable. So, you know, I was hearing your point about just be better people and don't make an effort of bringing in people of color or women. But I would argue that as an event, you know, promoter, organizer, I think you have to work harder, because otherwise the current percentage, just take, if you have 100 people and the current percentage is 1% or 5% of a given group, that means there's 5 people there, and you walk in, you feel like, oh my God, there's no one here that looks like me. There will be people that are particularly courageous, but that shouldn't be the barrier of somebody joining a community that they happen to be unusually courageous. Because a lot of really brilliant people are introverts, and they're like, oh my God, this is not for me. So I hear your point, and I think that individually that should be where we go, but I think that it's incumbent on companies and organizers to say, in 10 years, this should be transparent, we shouldn't care. But for the moment, I want the normally courageous person to feel comfortable coming to this event, because there are people that we've made it an environment that's comfortable. I mean, what do you think about that? Because it's a balance, but the problem is if we rely on individuals to on their own get better, it just takes too long, or it doesn't happen, or something happens that's external that makes everybody freaky.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Sorry, I'm talking too much.
I get it, I'll pass it to you. So I actually, as part of my class that I teach at C, there's a lot of very talented kids there. So we're talking about kids with like 3.8, 4.0 GPA. Actually, I took an entire team of kids to the MIT hackathon, which is cool. Now there's a big, I think, disparity in terms of the skills required to actually be in a place that you're talking about. Right? So if you bring somebody who can't code to something like that, that's great. Sure, somebody showed up, but now somebody not only can't take part in the hackathon, but they feel, you know, inferior. So the way I got around that was I found pockets of people who had the baseline skills to be able to do some of these things. Maybe didn't have the exact technical niche skills, but they had the cognitive capabilities to do them. And then I bridged those people who usually don't get access to the spaces that you're talking about, but had the capability to operate there to those spaces. Yeah. So to talk to what you're talking about, that's go find, like, whether it be NYU or more realistically somewhere like City or, you know, Baruch or one of the CUNY system schools. Go find some smart kids there, some smart people who maybe don't have any web VR experience but code really, really well. And those are the people who bring the diversity to an event like the one you're talking about. And then that happens without compromising the quality of the event. So I think that's a shortcut, again, that Paolo is helping design. But that kind of solves that. Because I know it is a problem for kind of organizers in that, like Hackernest, for instance, which is another meetup group here in New York, top tier hackers, right? And if somebody shows up who doesn't know what a commit is, they're just going to sit there doing nothing all day. So that's the way we've gotten around that at sea. So.
I would say, to your point as well, that is true. I feel like the individual is a long way out, which is true. But I feel like we could. There are a lot of different organizations that are running hackathons. A lot of companies are using hackathons to get a lot of different kids. I spoke at Human Hack here in New York as well, where they just go out and reach, but they build groups. They have Facebook groups, right? They have email logs of individuals that are based on inclusion, right? So I think that web VR is, that situation is tough, but I think as long as you keep having events, maybe more frequent, the more frequent events you have, the more buzz you get, especially in New York. New York is developing a good ecosystem for it now, which is good. We're getting a lot of support. So I would say, and just to answer your question, the individual part is out there, but I feel like if we have more hackathons, we have more places where we can share insight, we bring in more, we make the environment comfortable, a lot more women and people of color will be there.
I think your last point was really interesting about making the environment comfortable. So I'm Cynthia's husband, and I'm always amazed when she runs through like the Google halls or like Microsoft, and thinking about her sitting in a room full of 10 white males trying to make their points, and she's at the helm trying to lead this whole thing. And I think part of this, probably what's interesting, is also to share you guys' stories of what made you really comfortable to push the extra mile, even though you might have been the only person in the room of color, of a certain gender, whatever kind of thing, to kind of share out what other people can do better in order to make sure that the environment actually becomes more comfortable so the person doesn't leave the room even though she is the only woman.
Really quickly, I know we do have to wrap up. I would just say it's habit. You have to do it, and at the end of the day, you can't be scared of being first. And I think that's what it comes down to. We develop things when we're younger, and I think it starts with the education system, right? Yes. It starts with that. It starts with us as little kids. So I think as we grow up, because I always grew up like thinking you can do whatever you want to do. And I think that's also a good thing as well. So I think it's habit. I feel like I can go into a room and speak to whoever, and not even take it as if I am being biased against, right? So growing up in that atmosphere in that area, I feel like it's just habit. You got to get in the room and do it. From women to people of color, you got to get in the room.
I call it the comfort of being uncomfortable. So from a lot of my early corporate career, I was a data scientist, and I was the guy like behind the scenes doing whatever, and I'd have these bosses like, yeah, we did like a regression analysis. Someone asked me a question, Micah, so but then I made myself uncomfortable. I would go to meetings and I would say, listen, no, this is what's going to happen. And sometimes it got me in a lot of trouble. But all of that trouble built up to the point where I was able to have senior jobs at 25, 26, right? And I guess that's the only advice I give to POC to fix that, because unfortunately it shouldn't be on us, but it is, right? Like, as POC, I'm an extrovert, right? Not everyone's an extrovert. But whether you're extrovert, introvert, whatever, you really do have to be uncomfortable. You have to go into rooms you're not supposed to be in and speak up. And that's really hard, but the more you do it, the easier it gets. So.
Thank you very much. We need to wrap up, but thank you very much.